Just Branding. Podcast.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Just Branding. Jacob and I are super excited to have the wonderful Kaye Putnam with us today. She is a psychology-driven brand strategist. We'll get into that. She's a mum of two. She currently lives in North Carolina, and she has a very, very cool YouTube channel that myself and Jacob are big fans of. Definitely check it out, but not until you've listened to the rest of this episode. Welcome, Kaye, to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Matt and Jacob, thank you so much for having me. Geeking out about branding is my favorite thing in the world, so I can't wait for everything we're going to talk about.
You are way too positive, and I just have a confession to make that I do get annoyed with positive people. So you might have to. We might
unapologetically positive over here.
So, Kaye, if you've listened to any of our episodes, if any of our listeners obviously have listened to past episodes, they'll know that Jacob and I like to start with definitions because brand is kind of a hairy subject. And for you, I mean, all through your website and everything, you basically say you're a psychology-driven brand strategist. So I think for today, to kick things off, what we'd love to hear from you on is kind of how do you define brand and branding, and specifically, what is a psychology-driven brand strategist?
Mm-hmm. To me, branding is knowing who you are, either as a company or as a person, and then expressing that accurately. I think it might have been Socrates. I should not have ad-libbed that, but somebody very, very smart said that, know yourself and then be yourself. And to me, that is branding. And both ends of that equation requires psychology. So to know yourself, you need to delve deep into what is true for you, what's your point of view, what's your personality, how are you going to show up in the world, and then expressing that and understanding how other humans perceive you also takes psychology, because we rely on things like patterns and chunking information together to make quick assumptions about what brands or people or ideas stand for. So I help people with both sides of that equation, and I like to say that it is a journey. It's intentional alignment over time. You're going to get better and better at both knowing yourself and expressing yourself as you go.
That's absolutely wonderful. I think it sounds like something Jacob would say that, but probably wasn't. But,
she delivered it much better than I could have. That's for sure.
Okay, so what I think is interesting is this idea of psychology. Like, we're going to dig into that, I think, as we go through, because I think aren't you qualified in psychology or have a background in that in your training? So you must have found that super helpful when you come to brand and this idea of kind of helping people internally and externally. Tell us a bit about how you started off, your education, and where that's brought you today.
Mm-hmm. So it's only my undergrad minor that's in psychology, but I've always been obsessed with why humans make the decisions that they do. And to me, that was underneath everything that people were focusing on or that we naturally focus on. Like, yes, as designers, we love to see like great typography and like gorgeous designs come together. But if that's not based on some underlying truth, then it can fall flat, or you have to like redo it as the trends change in the market. So I've been a self-study from the undergrad years in everything from like philosophy to, decision making, like I said, to the symbolism and the collective unconscious, the things that we tap into that we don't even realize that we know. And I've incorporated a lot of that into my brand strategy with my clients to help them decipher who they are and how they're going to show up.
Sounds a lot like Carl Jung to me, and I'm a massive fan of Carl Jung. So yeah, brilliant. Collective unconscious. I saw what you did there. Just drop that in. Brilliant. So that was your background. Obviously, that sort of paved the way, and as you say, you've developed that. And I think a lot of us that play in brand strategy, if you can't see the value of understanding it from a psychological perspective, then you're definitely missing out, because that is basically how people. If you don't understand that, it's going to be hard to create meaning in somebody's mind if you don't kind of see those connections. But talk to us about your journey to where you are today, because you've mentioned design and it sounds like you've got a background in that as well. So talk to us about, what are the stages of your career? How has it led to this moment where you're sat in front of Jacob Cass and Matt Davies on the Just Branding podcast?
I'll tell you the abbreviated version.
That's the
Right.
base.
Because
Like
it's
the pinnacle of your career right now.
right now, right in this moment. Yes. True. Well, you guys did send me an amazing mug, and you are the only podcast that has ever done that. So thoroughly impressed. So like I said, I started off marketing degree with the psychology undergrad, started off in corporate America. And then I fell in love and got married. And for me, that meant that I was signing up to move every 2 years for the next foreseeable future. My husband was in the military at the time. So I needed to do something where I wasn't quitting a job and then spending 6 months trying to get hired again. This was in 2010, so like right after the recession back then. It was a really painful process to try to go through over and over. So I had been an entrepreneur before when I was young, quite young, 16-year-old, started my first business. So I knew that I wanted to get back to something entrepreneurial. I started off in a digital marketing agency and was doing basically whatever I had experience doing, from writing radio spots to look for local businesses to doing some design to eventually doing more of the strategy. Because I realized both in previous experiences and then working for that marketing agency that the marketing strategies didn't always create a return on investment if companies didn't have the brand settled, if they didn't have a really strong position in the market and a strong message. It almost didn't matter how much money they threw at advertising or at whatever strategy that they were trying. And I knew that I wanted to work with companies at the level that was actually going to create the most amount of return on investment. So that's how I really centered in on branding. And then after a while, I stopped working for the agency and then have been a independent consultant and have a small freelance team for my one-on-one clients now. We're kind of like half and half. We sell branding education to fellow business owners on one side of the business. And then on the other side of the business, we run a more traditional agency where we're developing brand strategies and identities for clients.
I think that's really interesting how you have a certain product that's actually productized for your clients. So like the lower rung clients, and then you have the higher tier products. Do you want to talk through this, value ladder, if you will, of how you actually go through that process of choosing who goes with what, or just that whole thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Similar to getting into online business was a necessity, getting into online products was a necessity for me. I was pregnant with my second child and due in about 12 weeks. So I'm like, you know what? If I don't do something different, like if I don't adjust my strategy, everything that I'm doing is based on my time. So like business is essentially going to stop. I can't take a maternity leave as an entrepreneur if I don't have some type of recurring revenue that's independent of my time. So I set out to offload my entire client process into a course and launched it. And it's still around to this day. So the beauty of that is a few things. One, I have a scalable offer. For the clients that can't afford me and my team to actually work on their brand, I have a very viable option for them to go through that entire process themselves. It's at a lower price point. And this has been valuable because it's actually propped up the value of the done for you services too. So I've been able to continue to raise those prices and have the confidence that I have something to help people that are in the earlier stages of business. So I've continued this kind of tandem business model. It's a little bit complicated, to be honest. It would probably be more streamlined if I focused in one direction or the other, but it works really well for my audience-based business strategy to have a lower priced option for people.
How hands-on are you with the lower tier pricing of a product with these clients? I noticed there was some coaching in there and so forth. So curious.
It depends on the product. So I have some courses like that first one. It's called Brand New Brand that have been around for, my daughter's 4 now. So it's been around for 4 years and it has gone through several iterations. So it's a pretty streamlined process. And that one only has a Facebook group that's attached to it where I jump in, a couple times a week. And then I have a monthly Q&A session. So it's relatively minimal. Most of the transformation actually happens within the course materials. But then when I'm launching a new course, like I did last fall, I tend to have more live components. So I did a weekly coaching call for that 30-day course because I wanted to be able to be in it with the students and to be able to field those questions and continue to improve the curriculum and the course as I go. So it depends on the course.
Okay, I just wanted to say how super inspirational you are, like, and pragmatic. Like, I think it's fantastic. Some of the things that you've just talked about, about being a mom and some of those challenges. And I think it's a massive credit to you that you've kind of navigated those things. And I just want to say, like, from my perspective, that's like, I'm super impressed, and I think you're fantastic. So good job on that, and what an inspiration, I'm sure, to some of our female listeners, perhaps, who perhaps have some of these challenges in their lives as well, and need role models or need people to bounce ideas off or glean inspiration from. So thanks for sharing that. And we may dig into some more of those difficult stories as we go through, but that's super helpful. So just on that front, like, how do you find balancing, mum life with your work? Is that tough for you, or like, how's it working out?
It keeps you honest, that's for sure. Because if the business isn't bringing in revenue for all of the time that I spend away from them, like, it becomes a very real, like, what's the word? Like, you have to keep balance. It's a beauty to have your own identity, but you have to be real honest with yourself about if you're being effective or not in your business. And I think that it's important not only for like mothers or people who have caregiving responsibilities, but I mean, dudes who want to go on vacation or like not be tied to their laptop. There's all sorts of reasons to seek out more scale and more leverage. I think especially in this industry or like this niche that we're in, designers and thinkers and strategists, like, we get so caught up in the fact that, like, we're the only one that can do the thing. But the beauty is, like, so much. So if you're able to create a process around that and put that into a product, you're going to be able to help so many more people and create a lot of leverage in your business at the same time.
That's great advice. And I know, Jacob, you've traveled a bit, haven't you? In your sort of your career.
Yeah, setting up different passive income streams is definitely gives you more freedom, and that's really what you're after here, right? The freedom to travel, and if you have to move every 2 years or did have to, like, that's so powerful. And I'm a big advocate for creating passive income as well, whether it be through courses or affiliate links or whatever it may be. There's many different ways for that to happen.
Mm-hmm. It gives you a chance to leave a little bit of a legacy too. Like, when everything that is stuck up in your head, or it only exists in one-to-one situations, you don't get to help as many people. So it's kind of fun to really spread your wings and see how many people you can help.
That's absolutely awesome, and your YouTube channel certainly does that. And as I said at the in the intro, like, that's a fantastic channel. How often do you sort of work on that, and what are some of the challenges keeping that up to date?
Mm-hmm. I like to say I hate doing what I call the business dishes. So, like, anything that I have to do every single day in my business and it just never stops is the worst thing in the world for me. So I chose YouTube very strategically because it's driven by search, which means that videos that you created less, 3 years ago could be found and benefited from now. It doesn't disappear like on Instagram and Facebook after 24 hours. So that was one piece. And then I batch my content. So again, being a person of limited time, this self-complicated business model with all these different plates in the air, it's amazing because I can sit down and record anywhere. I think my record is 16 in one day. I haven't broken that record yet. But yeah, so 16 videos in one day, and then spreading them out weekly or so. And then I have a team also that helps me with repurposing that content, because I call it my source content, because it's the stuff that I actually sit down and spend a lot of time on. And they can repurpose it into Instagram posts or into our email marketing, into blog article things that don't require as much of my touch, because I've already gotten what I know out of my head in the video format.
I love how the lack of time has kind of forced you into scaling and hiring other people. And like sometimes you just need that like linchpin to get that shit done, really. So it's incredible that that's how it has worked out for you.
Yeah. One of the best ways to get creative is to reduce your constraints. Like, I think I was reading one of Tim Ferriss's books this morning. It's like, instead of asking yourself, what are you going to do in 10 years? Ask yourself if you could get that same thing done in 6 months. And being a mom has effectively done that for me. But I think you can artificially create some of those restraints for yourself as well to see what's possible and to think actually more like a business as opposed to just like an individual genius that's getting hired.
Yeah, and being the genius, you are spinning so many plates as well. You're wearing so many hats, and like we get tied down. You think you have to do it all, but you're like a living proof that you don't have to. So I hope that inspires a lot of our listeners.
It's inspiring me, Jacob. It's inspiring me. It's the main thing, right? That's why I'm here, just to be inspired. Now, I want to shift the gear a little bit. So you've talked a lot about your background and all of that stuff, but I'm really keen that we sort of give the listeners some huge value from this episode, seeing as we've got your time here. And one of the videos that I happened to stumble into on your channel was about your 4C framework. And I wondered if you'd be happy to kind of share some of your knowledge, some of your thinking with our listener base, because I think they'll find that really helpful. Are you up for that?
I would love to. Absolutely. Yeah. So the 4C brand strategy framework is about baking those psychological elements into the brand so that you're meeting people at the different levels that our brain works. The first one is character. And this is about meeting people at the emotional gut level part of their brain, which, by the way, makes depending on the study, between 60 and 95% of the decisions when it comes to brands and purchases and daily life decisions. So it's really important not to skip this step. I have a tool that helps you define the brand personality called Brand Archetypes on my site. I'm not the only person to use brand archetypes, but to me, they're really useful in quantifying or like helping to focus in on a particular personality for your brand. And it's also really important to be unapologetic about what your brand believes. So to develop point of view statements. So that's the first C. Do you want me to just keep going all the way through?
Just to frame all of it, could you just mention the 4 C's so we know what we're going through?
Yeah, totally. So it's character, commitment, credibility, and context are the 4.
The 4 C's, brilliant. Yeah. And you just talked about like archetypes and personality. And you mentioned something there that I think I'd love to sort of ask you about before we go on to the next C, and that was point of view statements. So talk to us a little bit about that. How would one go about creating a point of view statement for their brand?
It's interesting because depending on your personality, you might be like very outspoken personally, or like me, you might stop to think like, okay, like everybody's telling me that I should be myself online and that I should be authentic. And then I kind of stopped and I was like, I don't know exactly how I want to be. Like I'm a mom. I used to be an athlete. I have all of these different facets of my personality. And as a personal brand, I could have brought any of those to light. So the exercise that I did then, and I do with all my clients, is I have them literally write the words "I believe" down a piece of paper and then finish that sentence as many times as possible. This should be done by the founder of the brand, the person that's leading the vision and the position in the market. But it can also be done with a team as well to decide, like, as a corporation or as a business, what you collectively believe, what you want to see that changed in the world, for example. And this elevates the conversation beyond these are my product's features and benefits and price to creating more of a movement behind your brand that people can get engaged with.
Do you ever do the opposite? Like, so sometimes I find it quite helpful to go like, we hate, or I hate, or something like that, which is quite aggressive, right? Or we're fighting against, because if and that way sometimes people struggle, right? To go, well, we think this, or we believe this. Sometimes it's easier to go, well, we don't believe that, right? Yeah. So we definitely are not that, but we are this. Have you ever tried that? Is that something that sometimes features?
Yeah, sometimes I call it the beliefs list and the bothers list. And this will make my clients a little bit uncomfortable, but I always assure them it's done under confidence. But I tell them to literally go out onto the internet and find examples of people's posts and content that just grate their nerves, like really irks them, and create a list of them so that I can then correlate or just extrapolate what the opposite of that thing is to get at their beliefs if they're having a hard time with the original exercise.
I think that's fantastic. And what that really does is it layers in a lot of meaning to the brand, and to the thinking, the strategic thinking. So I think that's super smart. All right. Do you want to tell us about the next C?
Yes. So commitment is just basically the nuts and bolts of your business or of your brand. What's the outcome that you're promising? Who are you serving and what are you doing for them? So it's really important to not get too stuck up in emotional land where you're just talking about this grand vision of how you want to change the world, but you're not ever acknowledging the fact of what you do as a product or service. So that's one of the 4 C's to not miss.
Love that.
Do you always go in the same order, or do you mix it up? Or
no, to me, I'm a very visual person. So to me, it's like 4 quadrants of a circle that you have to continually, or you just have to have all of them put together so that you have a full picture.
Okay. But
Nice.
Do you go in a particular order with your clients generally, or do you keep it streamlined?
I usually start with commitment, actually, because most people know what they're selling. Most people have validated that, or at least at the point where they're beginning to work with me. Like, okay, let's just get the boring stuff out of the way. What are we going to sell? And then I prefer to go right into character because that's the most fun for me. But I think you could do them in any order.
Inside commitment, you also mentioned who the brand serves, kind of thing. What if people don't really know? How do you sort of tackle that? Like, say you're in a workshop situation and you're like, right, you know what you're selling, who are you selling it to? And, there's a load of execs scratching their heads. Like, we think it's this kind of thing. What do you do then? Like, how do you sort of tackle that kind of situation?
Mm-hmm. It's such a chicken and the egg scenario, and it's a lot like dating. So we come up with this list of who our ideal client we think that they might be, but you have to see if the rubber actually hits the road and if that person is actually your ideal client. It's a little bit easier when you have close contact with your clients, I think, than if you were like the C-level exec. So that C-level person would probably have to go and have conversations with your frontline employees to see who actually is your best customers and what are their attributes, what do they value, those types of things. But when you're the person that is having contact with your clients, it's recognizing that some clients might be great on paper, like they have, they check all of the boxes, but there's just not that chemistry and you don't actually really love serving them. So it's going to be born out of real life experience. You have to make some assumptions first and then you test them in the real world.
I love that. Yes. Sometimes I love to say to people, like, who's your best client? Not the best client from a money perspective, but the one that you just love to take the call from, or the one that you just love to ship the product to because they are so grateful, or whatever it might be. And then let's think about them. Like, why do they value you so much? And base some thinking around your that sort of stuff sometimes quite helpful. But I really like your point there about, if you're dealing with a big exec team, C-level, and they are sort of, there's lots of onion rings, and they kind of they'd have to go off. One of the things I love to do is to try and get some of those people from the further rings of orbit into some of those workshop meetings. Sometimes just, I think sometimes that's helpful. What do you think about that? About getting people on the front desk, as it were, in to mix and sort of give their views on strategic thinking?
I mean, they're there having the conversations. I think you learn so much about your clients by their language, like the things that they say are their problems or that they say are their desires. And as a brand, if you can mirror some of that back to them, you're going to create a stronger relationship. So you'd be losing out on an incredible asset if you didn't have access to some of those conversations in one way or another.
Yeah. Nice.
When you're defining these customers, do you have any personas, or do you get to that in another section?
It is in this section, and I have a love-hate relationship with this whole ideal client persona because it's so malleable. Like, it's so, oftentimes we get too caught up in the demographics and we forget about the psychographics. So we get caught up in like, okay, my person is this 35-year-old mother of 2 who lives in North Carolina, but that doesn't really tell us anything about how to connect with her, how to build a relationship with her. So I think it's more helpful to have conversations about like, what does our person value? Or like maybe what do they aspire to? Like, what are their dreams? And using that to help inform some of the brand decisions. And those are what I build the personas around. It's like those, it's more like a personality profile than a census document.
And in this stage, do you go out and talk to these sorts of personas or people?
In my case, almost all of my clients are already working with clients. So we have the conversation together because they've had personal experiences with the people that they serve. In bigger businesses, I've done that before where we have more of a research element. But with my particular clients, most of them are personal brands. So we figure it out between ourselves.
Okay. So you've defined what they sell, why they're doing it, your brand archetype, and some of the personas. So what's next for you?
Yes. Then we give the left side of the brain some love with credibility. And this is all about the proof that you offer about why your product or service is valuable. It's the results that you've already created. It's the brand authority that you can borrow from other situations. So like if you have certifications or if you know some rich and famous person who speaks accolades about whatever you do, if you know or friends with A-listers in your industry and you have photos together, like some of these are a little bit cringeworthy, but all of them help build that trust and authority with our ideal clients as they're considering us.
So this is like a little bit of marketing. It sounds like you're kind of thinking out the end result of how you're going to market this. Is that right?
Yeah, it's what's your unfair advantage or what's going to seal the deal when it comes to selling, essentially. So yeah, we're trespassing over into marketing land here a bit.
So on a top level, like you're sort of starting, people thinking around, reasons to believe, reasons to trust.
Yeah.
And if there's some big obvious ones, I think that's great to bring into the conversation. What if they don't have any? What if they're like, do you know what, Kaye, I'm just starting out. Like, I haven't got a track record. Like, what sort of advice do you give somebody in that situation?
I mean, I feel like we need to convey trust in some fashion. So if you're a service provider and you're just getting started out, you have zero portfolio, zero case studies, zero testimonials, then you probably should get some beta clients and prove what you're selling, right? That would be the thing of integrity to do. But I'm also thinking, and this is where I think it comes back into brand land. It's like, what is true about your product or service that makes it valuable to people? So I bought some obscenely expensive probiotics a couple months ago from this company called Seed, purely based on branding. And their credibility for me was they have this whole board of PhDs that have developed this product. So they were borrowing authority just from the titles and the education of these people that they were able to point to on their website. So that was why I believed in them. And then they also pointed to other research. So even if you don't have things that are directly said about your brand, your specific situation, if I'm going to use myself for an example, I could talk about the fact that people make 95% of our decisions emotionally. So it makes sense that you're going to focus on emotions in your brand. You can borrow other people's research that has been used in other contexts that is relevant to your brand.
Yeah, that's great. And what you said there was value, which is an incredibly important word there, because what's valuable to someone is not valuable to someone else. And that's why knowing your customer, what their pain points are, is really so important in branding. And that's why I guess you start so early with that, because then you can actually resonate with them better. So I'm glad you touched on that.
That's brilliant. What's the last one then, Kaye? What's the last C?
Last one is context, which is all about contrast between you and the rest of the market. So it's what is unique about you? What is going to be different, not better, about your brand versus the substitutions and competition in the market? I break that into two pieces. So one is your competitors, like I mentioned, and then the other piece is your context within the current culture. So what's going on in the world that makes your brand uniquely relevant and useful right now? The example I like to give with this is if I were building a business and there was a zombie apocalypse happening, I wouldn't be a very valuable business. Like that context would not be conducive to the business that I run right now. So I'd have a completely different business in that context. So you have to consider like the technological changes, the just the shifts in people's like perceptions or politics, all of those things are influencing the ways that people value our brands.
I love that. Like, I've just suddenly started to imagine up like businesses that would do well in a zombie apocalypse, like, you know, chain stores, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, maybe I'd do that. Like, you know, just throwing some ideas out there. But just in regard to this idea of competition, right, and the context in the marketplace that you were talking about. Do you ever come across this? Because I come across this a load in my work, where you really sit down with people and you do a sort of an audit of the marketplace, the brandscape, I call it. Like, you know, here's the customer, they have this pain, here are some options in how they can solve that pain, and you are one of these options, right? Great. But when I look at the other options, you're not really that different to anybody else, right? You just have a different name, different location, different bunch of people, but really you're pretty much the same. Do you ever come across that? And then how do you sort of work to break out of that? Because I find that quite challenging unless the client is willing to actually confront that and actually start to then almost have almost pivot into a sort of an innovation sort of angle to address that problem. But, you know, what are your thoughts on it, and how do you kind of navigate that?
It's extremely pervasive, right? I don't want to pick on anybody, but I think of like chiropractic offices all having spines in their logo. Like, it's rampant in every industry. It's natural for humans to look at the most successful people in whatever identity we ascribe to and try to be more like them. But unfortunately, that's exactly the wrong thing to do when you're trying to be as successful as them or more successful as them. I can't remember which branding author it is, but it really is a different, not better equation, because you can't have better customer service, better prices to stand out. You have to have a completely different message. To me, I start to lean back into the emotion, that character piece that we talked about in the first C. If there's literally nothing different about the actual product or service. So if there's nothing that they can do to innovate what they're selling, they can at least innovate the position, like the emotional, psychological position they're taking in the market. So I tend to lean there. But if you can create something that does make your product or service fundamentally different than the other options, you're going to see so much more success than the average business.
Yeah, and I think that's where kind of brand thinking, in my view, needs, as consultants, or at least if you position yourself as a consultant, that's where you can lean into. Whereas when I sort of ran an agency which had to execute on design deliverables, that was less of a thing. But now I'm kind of a single solo kind of gunslinger. Like, I can start leaning into that and say, well, look, why don't we run a session on seeing how we could innovate and change things up? And, maybe we narrow down. Maybe we say we're the chiropractor for children, or the chiropractor for hamsters. Who knows? I don't know. But let's explain. Oh man, I don't know what's got into me in this episode. Hey, you're a bad influence. You are a bad influence.
I love it.
But it might be something like that. So the point is that maybe you niche in, or maybe you actually say, do you know what? Maybe it's like the whole experience rather than a 2-week treatment time. I'm not a chiropractor, so I'm just speaking out my ears at the moment. But maybe instead of 2 weeks, we do it faster, or maybe we have more comfy seats in our waiting room. Who knows? I don't know. Whatever it might be, you sort of start tailoring the experiences, and that's where kind of I think brands, brand thinking may start to go in the future. In terms of helping businesses, helping people think about developing that side of things. What do you think of that?
I love that. And I love that you're doing that work with your clients. I did a video recently on all of the different ways that you can niche down, because I think people get very narrow sighted. They're like, oh, I just have to pick like one product. I'm going to be the Facebook ad specialist. That's all I'm going to do. But there's actually a bunch of different ways that you can niche. Like, you can own an outcome, you can help, or you can connect to different identities that people have. You could blend 2 different ideas. So I love the idea that you had about, it's escaping me at the moment. But the thing that popped into my mind is I used to go to a dentist in Tennessee when we were living there that had blended together the idea of a spa and the dentist. So they had like relaxing music and like a waterfall, and they would be like give you all the laughing gas that you wanted. It was a very comfortable experience as opposed to what the dentist normally is. So you can get really creative in the way that you're standing out in a market.
I think this is pretty rampant in the food industry as well, where you see the blends of different cuisines coming together. So if you think about business like that, you can switch things up and just change it, become different to make your place in the market and to position yourself differently from everyone else. So thanks for sharing that.
That's a great thought. And I think the thing is it comes back down to knowing like who you serve, right? So what you're doing and who you're serving might be pretty much the same. But when you start going on to this final C, and you might think, in the context that we're playing in, maybe we need to think this through. I love that. I love this model. It's really cool. It's really cool. Thanks so much for sharing it. Do you have anything else you want to sort of add to what you said about the 4 Cs? Like, do you use it with all your projects, or do you find it only works really well in certain cases? Like, anything else to add?
I mean, to me, these are the 4 integral pieces of knowing your brand message and knowing where you stand in the market. And one of brand's biggest tasks is to drive demand in your direction so that you can either capture greater market share or raise your prices, support higher prices. And these 4 things will help you do that. So I think that if you get these basics down, you're going to be farther ahead than most people.
Well, can I ask on the flip side of that? Like, what happens if you do skip the process?
I think that what I'm seeing with like people that come to me that have skipped this process in the past, they find that they're rebranding like every 6 months because they're just following this like new trend, new shiny object. They haven't really done the work to dig into the core of what makes them special and strong and unique. So they don't have a sure footing and they're making decisions based on surface level ideas instead of these core ideas. So that's one of the biggest symptoms that I see is just this indecision with what the brand stands for.
I'm going to ask another question that's a common scenario where with, I guess, creatives is business owners they come to you saying, I need this, like I need a logo or I need a website. But how do you onboard them and get them to invest into strategy or invest in your course or invest in your one-on-one consulting?
That's such a good question. To me, that's as a personal brand in particular, that's the entire reason why I'm building a brand. I am building up the perceived value of my service, and I'm also selling and establishing the value of my proprietary process. So this 4C model is a part of my psychology-driven branding process. And the clients that will pay me premium prices are the ones that have bought into the value of that. I position myself deliberately at this cross-section of psychology and brand strategy so that I can charge the prices that I do and that I become an obvious singular choice in people's minds for the ones that buy into that notion. And the people who are just looking for a logo or just looking for XYZ, just a website, I've priced myself out of that market purposely. And then I just don't offer it. Like it's just not part of my service menu.
So positioning is the answer there. And that's really what it comes down to. So you have to price yourself in a way or position yourself in a way to actually elevate your value. So
yeah,
I think that's quite challenging for some designers because often as if you're trained and if you've kind of grafted your way through, I don't know, agency or freelance life, you see yourself as a designer, right? So but then you're finding yourself in this quagmire where everybody's fighting and you're kind of commoditized. And I think that's why there's a lot of interest in this podcast and in some of the things we're talking about here, because people are like, hey, like how do we actually get, higher up the food chain, so to speak? How do we add more value? And strategy is one of the ways that we can do that. But then suddenly, hang on, if I'm going to have to start really thinking how I do design. And I think that's quite a challenge for some people. So just out of interest, did you, you seem to, in your story that you talked about, let's just go full circle, back to the story, back to the Kaye story. You sort of mentioned like you're working in this marketing agency and you realized that brand thinking, that brand strategy got a better return. Did you ever kind of have any regrets of leaving behind perhaps some of the more tactile stuff? Do you kind of miss that stuff at all, or do you find yourself very fulfilled in the space that you're in right now?
Yeah, so I haven't gone full strategy like you have. I still am in the process of building things for clients. It's just that my team does it for me. I get to be the creative director in that process and the strategist and play that role, but I still get to see some of the stuff come to life. So it scratches that itch for me. Plus I get to have a little bit of control over that process too, because it's a little bit it's a challenge many designers will find when you're focusing more on strategy and handing it off to somebody else to implement. Sometimes it does, like you lose a little bit in translation. So I find that I create a better output for my clients if I start with the strategy, but then I also have an excellent team that can help bring that to life, at least in the VIP assets.
So that gives a good point. Like, what is your deliverable that you hand off to your team or your client?
Mm-hmm. When I'm doing consulting with a one-on-one client, it's what I call a brand source book. It's a brand guidelines website instead of a PDF. It's essentially a typical brand book, but on steroids. It talks about all of the 4 C's in great detail. And then we also bring it to, we translate the strategy into what that means for both messaging and design. So it goes into detail beyond the strategy. It's like, this is who we are. This is how we're showing up. These are all of the 4 C's and then some other elements as well. This means that we use these kinds of words in our messaging. We avoid these kinds of words. We would say, join our newsletter list in this way, but not in this way. And then these are the stories that our brand tells. So becomes this reference document for either just the entrepreneur, if it's a solo business, to refer back to whenever they're jumping on a podcast to be interviewed or whenever they're launching something new to check themselves against their strategy. And then it becomes super valuable when you have team members who can all reference that document to come back to what the heart and truth of the brand is and stay on track.
And I actually saw you had a version of this on your site, so the listeners can go check it out. It's online. So is that document what you give to your team, or is it something else internal as well?
Yeah, it's both. So I have one for myself and my team that we use on a weekly basis, and then I create them for my clients as well.
Great.
Kaye, it's been absolutely fantastic having you on. Thanks so much for sharing all that knowledge, all of that smart wisdom that you have in your bubbly personality as well. We've had great fun with you, and thank you for being patient with us and for giving us your time. I just want to say that it's been brilliant. We'll post some links in the write-ups so that people can follow and have a look at you. Just a quick note to our listeners, please do like, share, follow the podcast and give us some reviews. I think we've not asked for that for a while, so please do that. It really means a lot to us. If you found some value, please drop us a line. We do appreciate it. So yeah, from me and Jacob, thank you so much, Kaye, for coming on. Any final words before we leave you?
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast. And I just want to encourage everybody that is doing this entrepreneurship thing to stick with it, because we honestly all need your genius. So share it in whichever way feels great for you and keep at it.
Thank you so much, Kaye.
Thank you.